Oh man, we are back. We're back, baby! It's the final chapter and the final week of this book as we are continuing on in the book of John with chapter 18. Now today and the rest of this week is when we start reading about Jesus' final days, his betrayal, arrest, crucifixion, and ultimately resurrection. It's sad, exciting, and amazing, the whole range of emotions this week as we go through the final days of Jesus' ministry. Well, let's not waste any time. This is chapter 18. Where we left off on Friday, Jesus was praying for three different people: himself, his disciples, and then all future generations of believers, including ourselves. Now, immediately after this, Jesus goes out with his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, Judas was obviously not with them, but having been there before many times with Jesus and the other disciples, he knew this was a place where they could find Jesus. But the way John describes what happens next is really incredible. So look at what happens when Judas meets up with Jesus and the other disciples in verses 3 through 11. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Then he asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none." Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me?" Now this is incredible to see. On the surface, Jesus was simply identifying himself as Jesus of Nazareth, but just as the other times in this book with the "I am" statements by Jesus, he identifies himself as God. Now this explains why the men are involuntarily forced to their knees in the presence of his sheer inherent power. I mean, there was literal physical power emanating from Jesus in this moment, and yet he still surrenders himself over to these men. They couldn't force Jesus to do this. They couldn't even stand upright in his presence. Jesus chose to go with them. Now, as Jesus is taken before the high priest, Peter and another unidentified disciple, who was most likely John, followed at a distance. Now, as Jesus goes inside to be questioned, Peter is standing in the courtyard, and the first of three denials begins. Remember that Jesus already warned Peter that this was going to happen, so look at verses 17 through 18. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, aren't you?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. I don't even think Peter realized what was happening in this moment. He was just reacting out of caution to the question. I mean, he wasn't sure what to do, so he just lied. But now go to verses 25 through 27. Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Now we know from the other Gospels that as soon as the rooster crowed, it dawns on Peter what has just happened. I can only imagine the weight of that on Peter as he realizes what he's done and that Jesus already told him it was going to happen. Now, of course, Jesus still loved Peter, which is why he warned him about it in the first place, but the sheer agony and guilt that Peter had to feel in this moment, it was almost more than he could bear. So Jesus is questioned by the high priest, but because none of them can legally condemn Jesus to death, they have to bring him before the local governor Pilate. Again, remember, the Jews were living under Roman occupation at this time. They would have loved nothing more than to put Jesus to death right then by stoning him, but they had to bring him here first. So Pilate comes and talks with Jesus, and they have this fascinating dialogue at the close of the chapter. So look at verses 33 through 40. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him at all. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" Then they all cried again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. Jesus identifies himself as a king and even acknowledges that if his kingdom were of this world, that his servants would fight, but his kingdom isn't from here. Now that's something crazy to think about. Jesus had full authority over the entire armies of heaven. I mean, a single word from him and a legion of angels would have wiped out the entire Roman army down to the last soldier, and yet Jesus doesn't do it. Now after this, Pilate still finds no fault in him and even offers the option of releasing someone to the Jews at Passover since it's a custom, but instead of asking for Jesus, who was innocent, they demand Barabbas, who was not only a robber, but we also know from the book of Mark that he murdered people. You see, Jesus was presented with opportunity again and again to make an escape, and yet he takes none of them. He willingly went to the cross out of sheer love for all of us. Man, oh man, guys, that is chapter 18. These chapters are always incredible to read through and see the willpower, love, and just strength of Jesus. It just blows my mind. Well, tomorrow we're picking it up in chapter 19, and Jesus is now heading towards the cross. Hard chapters to read, but the love of God on full display as Jesus willingly lays down his life. Man, guys, thank you so much for being here and reading along. Hope you have a beautiful day today. Know that God loved you enough to send Jesus to do this all for you. No matter where you are or what you've done, everything that we've read was done for you so that you could come to God. All right, I love you all. See you tomorrow.